Is Christianity actually an ancient drug sex cult? Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, I'm Colin, the resident nerd and Bible scholar here on the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. What we're talking about today is an idea that circulates around on the internet every once in a while, but has gotten really popular in the last year thanks to one Ammon Hillman. Like me, Hillman grew up Baptist and has dedicated a large portion of his life to studying and understanding the Bible and ancient languages. He has always kind of been on the fringe of biblical scholarship, and it seems that the more time goes on and he has now gotten less tied to academic institutions, he has been more free to express his, how shall we say, unorthodox views. This came to light a little over a year ago when he was on the Danny Jones podcast and made some rather unusual claims about Christianity, particularly that the word Christ actually refers to a drug salve, rubbing drugs on your body, particularly on your eyes, and in some cases to alleviate the sting of a gadfly. He then took that and said that Jesus was not being followed around by 12 adult males who wanted to learn from him, but actually that he was running an underage drug sex cult in which he was trafficking 12 underage boys and using a toxic venom to get some sort of a high, and that there was a particular medicine that he would use to get off of the high. He took a little bit too much at the cross, and that is why he died. Oversimplifying. Believe me, you can find the videos online if you really wanted to. Now, the majority of our listeners tend to be very smart, logically thinking, biblically literate people. So I can imagine that most of you watching this right now are raising a serious eyebrow and going, what the heck are you talking about here? And well, you should be, because when someone brings such unusual claims about the Bible, they have the burden of proof to explain why this is the case. And most of Hillman's argument relies on how he translates the word Christ. Now, if you were to do a simple search in a good Bible dictionary, you would find probably that Christ means Messiah, anointed one, perhaps even to rub something on. You may find that definition depending on where you're looking. This happens especially when Hillman references Revelation 3:18. Let me read that real fast. I counsel you to buy from me gold tried in the fire, that you may be rich, and have white raiment, that you may be clothed, and that the shame of your nakedness does not appear, and that you anoint your eyes with eye salve, that you can see. And that word anoint, he'll tie in with Christ, say it's talking about this eye salve, and then he'll go back and interpret the Gospels through that lens. The problem is, the word in Revelation 3:18 is not actually technically Christ. It is a related word to the root from which Christ comes. If you were reading the New Testament in Greek, you would often find Christos as the word for Christ, or some variation of that. There is a verb beneath that, which is kreo, and that is to anoint, to smear on something, to rub on something. The word that's actually used in Revelation 3:18 is not kreo, but enkreo. It is a preposition added to the front of kreo. So it slightly changes the meaning to focus on rubbing on something. It's still related, but it's a slightly different focus. That word in particular is more so about rubbing some sort of a salve on something. So the problem with taking the meaning of enkreo and then reading it back into Christos would be like if I saw someone use the word presuppose and I defined what they were talking about based on what suppose means. Presuppose adds the preposition to the front of it, pre, so they're related words, but the meanings aren't identical. And that's kind of what we have going on here. He's taking the meaning from one word and importing it back into a related word. Another problem is that Christos is not original to Greek. The term that is being used there as a person, as a Messiah figure, is referring back to Hebrew, which would be Mashiach. So we run into issues when we're defining a word in one language by its meaning in a later language. Now, Hillman probably would not accept that argument because one of his other unorthodox views is that the entirety of the Bible was originally written in Greek. And so for him, the Septuagint would be the original Old Testament, and it was only later translated into Hebrew from Greek. That is not accepted by most scholars, although there are a few that will follow that view. Now, I do not have time in this video to address every single one of Hillman's unorthodox views. That would take hours upon hours to do. So let's just go back to the original question. Does Christ actually mean to use drugs or to smear drugs on someone? Well, no, it does not. There is a rare instance of the word where it can be used of a medicine of some sorts, but that is from later Greek, and that form of the word does not appear anywhere within the biblical text. Words mean different things in different contexts, and just because a word can mean something in one particular context doesn't mean that it automatically can or should mean that in a different context. Just think of like the word box in English. Just because boxing is a sport where people punch each other doesn't mean that every time that word boxing is used, that's what it means. If I said I'm boxing up a gift for your birthday, you wouldn't think I'm punching it. If I said I boxed someone in when I parked, you wouldn't think that I punched their car. Context determines the meaning. So to use the rare definition of a word from outside of the Bible to explain what a frequently used related word in the Bible means is not great scholarship. It makes perfect sense to say that the Greek word Christos was used as the equivalent of the Hebrew word Mashiach, because in ancient Israel, they would Mashiach the people that they were anointing for a particular task, be that a king or a priest or sometimes even other characters. They were rubbing oil on their bodies. That is not the same thing. And just because you can rub a drug onto your body doesn't mean that every time a word for rubbing something on your body is used means that it was a drug. Now, to be clear, there absolutely were drugs that were used in the ancient world. And I'm perfectly fine with changing traditional interpretations of texts if modern scholarship finds that we got something wrong in the past. However, the views that Hillman have presented seem completely contrary to the nature and message of Jesus as presented in the Gospels. And while we're speaking of character, I realize it is not a requirement for being a good scholar that you also be a good person. But if you watch some of Ammon Hillman's content, he can be very aggressive toward people who disagree with him and quite rude and vulgar, resorting to ad hominem attacks about another person, calling them an idiot, cursing them out. That's usually the sign of someone who doesn't actually know what they're talking about, because usually it's the loudest person in the room who is the least sure about what they're talking about. And a good scholar knows that other good scholars will disagree with them, and that's okay. Peer review is a necessary part of good scholarship. It's not just that anyone can say whatever they want or claim to have whatever evidence they want. I can grab plenty of sources and claim they back up something, but we actually have to examine them and see if they do. If almost none of the experts in your field are agreeing with you on something, that's probably a sign that you're wrong. And you can't just claim that they're wrong or bad scholars or unlearned or uneducated or idiots just because they disagree with you. So if you come across this or any other of Ammon Hillman's views on social media circulating around and they make you a little nervous, don't worry. They're fringe for a reason.